The night was thick as ink, swallowing the winding mountain road. I gripped the steering wheel, fighting the weight of my own exhaustion. Only the icy air flooding my lungs kept me conscious. The car radio murmured out a faint, distorted melody, occasionally breaking with bursts of static, like some dying whisper struggling to be heard. I knew this road by heart. I drove it several times a week. Driving at night was my job. But tonight, the fog was different. It wasn't just dense, it felt like a living thing, a damp, gray veil that smothered the world, thick enough to drown in. My headlights barely cut through it, illuminating only a few feet ahead, the road appearing in brief ghostly flashes before vanishing into the void. It felt like I was crossing a bridge over nothingness, inching forward at the very edge of some endless abyss. I took a turn, and I saw it. A bus stop by the roadside. It had been abandoned for years, a forgotten structure left to rot in the elements. The metal signpost stood crooked and rusted, its once bright lettering now faded and chipped. The glass shelter was shattered, its broken panes like jagged teeth, revealing the dust-covered bench within. I had never seen anyone waiting there. Not once. Especially not at this hour. And yet, a figure in white stood beneath the shelter. A sharp constriction gripped my chest, my pulse stuttering. A girl. She wore a white dress, her frame frail and delicate, long dark hair cascading over her shoulders like a waterfall of ink. Her skin was pale, too pale. Not merely light, but unnaturally white, translucent, as if she was made of the mist itself. She was looking at me. I felt my foot ease off the accelerator, my speed dropping instinctively. Her lips moved. She was speaking. But I heard nothing. The car windows were shut, the radio still played its distant, crackling tune, but her voice did not exist. I passed the bus stop, and for a brief, chilling moment, my gaze locked with hers. A cold shock shot through my spine, crawling over my scalp like icy fingers pressing against my skin. I snapped my eyes back to the road. Kept driving. Kept moving forward. But then, a clear, deliberate knocking on my window. Right beside me. I felt my stomach drop, a deep, nauseating plunge into terror. My fingers tightened around the wheel, knuckles bone white. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down. I slammed the accelerator, the engine growling as the car lurched forward, the radio's distorted hum swelling into a deafening drone. I didn't look. I didn't dare. Some instinct buried deep in my bones screamed at me. If I turn my head, I will see something I should never see. Minutes passed. The bus stop disappeared into the fog, swallowed by the night. The mist still clung thick around me, wrapping the road in a suffocating embrace. I forced my breathing to slow, trying to convince myself that it was nothing. A trick of the mind. A hallucination. Just exhaustion. Just. My eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. And my breath froze. Faintly, on the passenger side window. A handprint. Blurry. Smudged. Pressed against the glass from the inside. The morning sunlight spilled through the window, casting long golden streaks across the kitchen floor. It should have brought warmth. But I was still cold. Colder than I had been last night. Sitting at the kitchen table, I wrapped my fingers around a steaming cup of black coffee, yet my hands still trembled slightly. The memories of last night refused to fade. The handprint on the window. The girl at the bus stop. The silent whispering that I knew, deep down, had never truly been spoken. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the moisture from the mountain air had formed patterns on the glass, creating the illusion of a handprint. Maybe the girl was just a lost traveler, waiting for a bus that would never come. I almost convinced myself. Almost. Until I unlocked my phone and scrolled through the news. An old article appeared on my screen. Teenage girl killed in rainy night, hit and run, driver never found. The headline hit me like a knife to the gut. My eyes froze on the accompanying photo. A familiar bus stop, the same one I had passed last night. But in the picture, the wet pavement was still stained with dark streaks of blood, half washed away by the rain. Nearby, a broken umbrella lay discarded on the roadside, its fabric torn, smeared with mud. My chest tightened. I forced myself to read further. The accident had happened 5 years ago, on a stormy night, just past midnight. A 17-year-old girl had been crossing the road when a speeding vehicle struck her. The driver never stopped. They left her there, bleeding out in the rain. The police searched for months, inspecting every possible car, but they never found the culprit. The case had gone cold. A 5-year-old stormy night. Something cracked open inside my mind. A memory. That night. The same mountain road. The same pouring rain. I was driving my truck, heading back to the city. The rain blurred the windshield, the wipers frantically slashing back and forth, yet my vision remained a smudged mess of water and darkness. And then, a dull, sickening thud. The sound had haunted me for years, buried beneath layers of denial. It was the sound of my tire hitting something. Something solid, yet soft, followed by the wet splatter of displaced rainwater. My heart had pounded so violently I thought my ribs would shatter. I had gripped the steering wheel so tight that my knuckles ached. And I never stopped driving. I didn't look back. I didn't check. I just kept telling myself. It was a puddle. Just a deep puddle. Nothing else. But now that wall of lies was crumbling. The fear, the shame, the guilt I had buried for years. It had found me again. My stomach clenched like an iron fist had wrapped around my insides, suffocating me. Was I the driver? The room darkened. Outside, the sky had grown heavy and gray, storm clouds rolling in like a looming shadow. I glanced down at my hands. The coffee had gone cold, yet my fingers still shook uncontrollably. I could not escape this. There was only one thing left to do. I had to go back. Back to that road. Back to that bus stop. To find the truth. Or to face her. Midnight. I was back. The winding mountain road stretched ahead, swallowed by the creeping void of night. My headlights pierced the darkness, but the fog was thick, alive, almost, shifting like a slow, sentient thing, consuming the asphalt inch by inch. The air was dense, suffocating in a way that had nothing to do with temperature. Even with the heater on, my fingers were ice cold. I didn't know why I had come back. Maybe it was guilt, clawing its way out from the grave where I had buried it. Maybe it was last night's blood-stained handprint, a warning I could no longer ignore. Either way, I was already marked. Up ahead, the bus stop emerged from the fog. A lone, forgotten island in a sea of nothingness. As my headlights washed over it, I felt my breath hitch. My grip on the steering wheel tightened. Because she was there. The girl. The same white dress. The same frail figure. Long, dark hair draping over her shoulders, concealing the angles of her face, making her look less like a person and more like something that had never belonged to this world at all. She wasn't supposed to be here. She shouldn't be here. Her lips moved. A silent murmur. The fog swallowed her words, but I knew she was speaking. And yet, there was no sound. Not from the night. Not from her. Not from anything. I sat frozen, locked in place, staring. I didn't know what to do. Run? Stay? Get out? And then, she moved. Not like a person. Not with footsteps. But with a slow, drifting glide, like she was being carried forward by the mist itself. The fog rolled with her, coiling at her feet. I could feel my own breath struggling, as if something was curling around my throat, squeezing ever so lightly. She stopped, less than a foot from my window. Her face lifted, the milky glow of the headlights catching on her ashen skin. And then, her eyes met mine. Black, hollow, bottomless. My mind blanked. I couldn't breathe. She parted her lips. And this time, I understood.
You killed me.
The words took form even though I heard nothing. Then, her face reflected in the glass. Only, it was different. Her pale skin split open, dark rivulets of black tears spilling down her cheeks like decayed blood, staining her dress. Her mouth tore wider. A gaping, unnatural rift that stretched far beyond what any human jaw could bear. The emptiness in her eyes deepened, and for the first time, I saw it. The grief, the agony, the hatred. The fog swirled violently, and then, my mind snapped open. And suddenly, I was 5 years in the past. The storm, the road, the rain. It came back all at once, like a dam collapsing. The headlights cutting through the downpour. The wipers struggling against the flood of water. And then, a white blur. A figure too fast. I had no time to react. A heavy, sickening impact. The wheel jerked under my hands, and I nearly lost control. Through the rearview mirror, I saw her, collapsing onto the wet pavement, her limbs twitching weakly. The rain pounded her motionless body, washing away the blood, dragging it into the black asphalt. And I never stopped. I never turned back. I never looked. I fled. I had let the dark consume me, burying that moment so deep it had rotted inside me for years. And now, she was here. She had never left. I gasped, my foot slamming down on the brake, tires skidding against the slick road. The seatbelt cut into my chest, forcing the breath from my lungs. And through the windshield, she was still there. The black tears never stopped flowing. Her lips never closed. Because she wasn't here to haunt me. She was here for justice. For revenge. She wasn't going to let me go. Dawn crept over the mountains. A pale, faded gray-blue bled into the horizon, stretching its cold fingers across the thinning mist. And yet, I felt no warmth. I sat rigid in the driver's seat, my fingers locked around the wheel, knuckles white as bone. I didn't remember leaving the bus stop. Didn't remember starting the car. The last thing I remembered was her eyes. The hollow, black voids that had swallowed the night. The gaping mouth, stretched too wide, a silent scream of accusation. The whispers. The judgment. My hands. They were stained with her blood. And she had come back for what was hers. Slowly, I lifted my gaze to the windshield. My stomach twisted. There. A handprint. Smudged in deep, dark red, the fingers elongated just slightly, as if something had tried to press through the glass, reaching for me. The road outside was silent, the trees on either side unnervingly still, the mist pulling back, leaving only emptiness. I forced a shaky breath, willing my body to move, to function. I turned the key. The engine growled to life. I pressed my foot to the pedal, guiding the car forward, toward the city, toward distance. But a sudden, sharp burst of static crackled through the radio. I jolted, fingers tightening around the wheel. The screen flickered. The broadcast was warping, the usual monotone announcer's voice twisting, stretching, breaking into distorted whispers. Low. Garbled. Like something was speaking from behind a thin, fragile veil, its words filtered through the fractures of reality itself. And within the static, a voice. Soft. Sharp. Familiar. A girl's voice. A whisper that curled around my bones.
Thomas, you must repay.
My hand slipped, the wheel jerking beneath my grip. Then, silence. The radio snapped back to normal, soft background music humming as if nothing had happened. As if it had never happened. But the words remained, echoing inside my skull, coiling around my mind like cold, tightening chains. I swallowed, my throat dry, my pulse hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. A prickle crawled up my spine. And then, in the rearview mirror, I saw it. The bus stop. And something new. A stone monument stood there now, pristine and untouched, bathed in the fragile light of dawn. I hadn't seen it before, because it hadn't been there before. And yet, the name carved into the stone was unmistakable. Alice Winters. The year of her death. The memorial that had never existed. And now, it was there. Like it had always been. Like it had been waiting for me to remember. A cold, suffocating pressure squeezed my lungs, making it impossible to breathe. The car kept moving, pulling further and further from the bus stop, from her. But, in the mirror's reflection, she was still there. A white figure, standing in the thinning fog, watching. Unmoving. Waiting. Whispering. I clenched the wheel, my fingers numb with cold, my mind a spiraling abyss of dread. And then, the sound came from the window. Slow. Steady. Close. The air inside the car turned heavy, soundless. The light of dawn did nothing to chase away the shadows that clung to me. She wasn't gone. She had never left.